Hey guys, my name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be filming one of the videos that I look forward to the most in the entire year, and that is my favorite books of 2020! I'm pretty excited about this list of books this year because this year I have read more than I've read any year previously. I'm at 143 books at the moment that I'm doing this. So I've read quite a number of books this year, and I've actually had a better reading year than I've had in any previous year, at least like ratings wise. Like I've had the most 5-star books in one year that I've ever had in this year, which is great because 2020 really sucked, you know, but at least my reading was pretty great this year. And so on this list, I have 17 of my favorite books of 2020, along with some honorable mentions that I'll go through really quickly at the beginning. But this year I am doing something a little bit different with my best books of the year because I usually do have like a very strict countdown of like leading up to my #1 favorite. But this year I kind of just feel torn over all of my favorite books of the year, and I definitely still have like a top 5 like that are my absolute favorites, but I don't really think I can choose a favorite out of those 5 just because they're so different and because I love them for different reasons, and it just feels like too much pressure to try and pick my favorite out of those 5. So I will have my list of 17 that are in no particular order until we get to that top 5, and then I'll let you know these are my absolute god tier top 5 favorite books of the year. But before we do jump into the top 17, let me just tell you about some of my honorable mentions. We'll just go through them real quickly. The first one is Felix Ever After by Case and Callender, What Lies Between Us by John Mars, The Roommate by Rosie Danan, The Death of Vivek Oji by Owaki Emezi. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. And then I have Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, A Good Marriage by Kimberly McCreight, Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellifer, and A Promised Land by Barack Obama. See, that's how you know that my reading year was pretty great this year, because in any previous years, those books definitely would have been in my top favorites of the year, but I've just had such a good reading year that it's been really hard to narrow down my top absolute god tier faves. But I have done it, so let me tell you about them. First one on this list is going to be Shipped. Even though I know this book technically doesn't come out until January, so it's technically a 2021 title, but I read this book for the first time this year, and it was so freaking cute. And this book kind of describes itself as The Unhoneymooners meets The Hating Game, which are 2 of my favorite hate to love romances of all time. And so I just absolutely love this book. I had so much fun with it. It's kind of like a hate to love romance that also deals with a cruise atmosphere, so it's very like beachy and kind of like summery vibes, and it was just the perfect escapism. I had so much fun with this book, and I just really adored this couple so hard in this book. I already lent it to my mom to read it, so she's reading it now because I loved it so much. The next one on my list is going to be The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. This book was probably the scariest book that I read in 2020, and what I mean by scariest is that I felt the most genuine terror while reading this book, and I had to literally shut it off because I was reading it as an ebook on my phone. I literally couldn't like sleep. I couldn't read this book in the dark. Like, I was genuinely terrified. We're following this guy who's been in this insane asylum mental hospital for pretty much his entire life, and so we get to hear stories about his childhood and kind of how he ended up there, and it's all about this same patient. The way that this book was told was just really creepy. It was really effective, and I got terrified. Like, oh my gosh, some of the scenes in this book just gave me chills. Like, I don't know what it is about children acting really creepy and like almost like they're freaking possessed by the devil or something. Like, it was just terrifying, and it was exactly the kind of horror that I enjoy, so I was really surprised by this one. Really enjoyed it. Another one of my absolute favorites this year is They Never Learn. And this one is another one that really surprised me. This one is a thriller novel that has a female serial killer who is a professor on a college campus. And this one was just so great. I've seen a lot of people compare this to like Killing Eve, which I can definitely see those vibes because the main character, who's a serial killer, she's bisexual, and there's a lot of like female romance happening in this book as well. She's a serial killer, but she's taking out men who are just absolute garbage. She's kind of like Dexter, but like a female and just like doing the most. And I just thought it was really entertaining to read about, and I thought it was so well written, and there's a plot twist almost like halfway in the middle of this book that I was like completely shook by. It was such a good twist. Another one of my favorites this year is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is a pretty recent read of mine, and Matt Haig is just Everything. I love his writing so much, and the premise of this book is so unique, which is I think why it's stuck with me so much, because basically this woman at the beginning of this novel attempts to kill herself, and then she goes to this place called the Midnight Library, which is this place that is between life and death. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of books on the shelves of all the different decisions that she could have made in her life, and she kind of gets the opportunity to explore those potential realities in this book. And that's one of my favorite things ever in books, when a character kind of explores the idea of an alternate reality for their own life. Like, that is just so fascinating to me, and it really makes you think about the choices that you're making in your life and how maybe there's an alternate version of you out there somewhere living a really different life, and if you are the happiest version of yourself, and it really makes you question your regrets and if your regrets are meaningless. And it's such a good book, one of the best reading experiences I had this year. Another one of my favorites of the year is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This book is a historical fiction time travel novel, and it's the thickest book that I think that I read this year, because it's like 850 something pages. But this book was definitely a slow burn. Like, it took me some time to get invested in this book, but by the ending I was bawling my eyes out, as you probably saw with the reading vlog that I posted earlier this year. But my god, this book just really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting to get as emotionally invested in this story as I did. Sadie is one of my favorite characters that I read this year. I just absolutely adore her. Another book that I was completely taken off guard by, and I was so surprised that I love this, is Bunny by Mona Awad. I actually read this book for the video that I did earlier this year of reading Kayla's favorite books, and I'm so glad that I finally picked this book up because it was so freaking weird. Like, this book is probably the weirdest book that I've ever read, and I definitely wouldn't just go around recommending this book to anyone. This is a horror novel that takes place on a college campus, and it follows this young girl named Samantha, and she kind of gets involved with this almost like this cult group of girls on the college campus. They all call each other Bunny. It's very much like Heather's vibes and like Mean Girls vibes. The things that this group of girls does in their little club is just crazy, terrifying, bonkers, okay? It was just so much fun to read about. This book was just so weird, and I loved everything about it. Some of my favorite romances of this year included Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. And yes, I'm counting this as one book, even though I know it's two. But I have to include them both because I do think I enjoyed Take a Hint, Danny Brown even more than Get a Life, Chloe Brown, but I gave them both 5 stars, and they were just both such warm, fuzzy feeling romance books. These both follow sisters in this like romance series, and I just love both of the sisters so freaking much, but I feel like I related a whole lot to Danny's character for so many different reasons. But these romances were just so cute. Like, honestly, they're so lighthearted, and Talia Hibbert's writing is so refreshing, and just it made me so giddy to read these books. And I'm so glad I gave these books another chance, because I had originally DNF'd Get a Life, Chloe Brown last year, but I think I just wasn't really in the mood for romance when I picked it up or something, because this time around I loved it right from the jump. So I'm really glad I gave this one another chance, because oh my god, these books are the cutest, and I can't wait to read the 3rd book next year. Another one of my favorites this year is The Bright Lands by John Fram. This book just came out of nowhere and just like launched into my all-time favorite books list, because this book is a kind of like thriller horror novel. It takes place in a very small town in Texas, and we're following this main character Joel, who's gay, and this is an Own Voices book. He goes back to this small town because his younger brother just went missing, who's this like football player in the town. He's like a teenager, and they're trying to figure out what happened to his brother and what's happening with all of these players on this football team. It's written in a way that's really creepy and just really atmospheric, and oh my god, this book was everything. It was a horror novel, but it's so gay, and I've just always wanted to read something like this. Like, John Fram is like the gay Stephen King up in here, like changing lives. This was just so good, and I can't wait to see what John Fram does in the future. Like, his writing was just everything in this book. The ending is one of those endings that just makes you feel like so confused, and you need to go and like do research about the ending and try to talk with other people about what their theories are, and like that is just one of my favorite things. I love that so much. Another thriller that I really enjoyed this year is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I know this book is probably like extremely overhyped at this point and everybody's over it, but I had the most fun reading this book. This is a kind of like murder mystery whodunit story, and it all takes place on this island in Ireland, and it takes place during a wedding, which is like really fun, and one of the members of the wedding party get murdered, and then you spend the whole book trying to figure out who got murdered and who murdered that person. And it's just really fun because once you finally figure out who did get murdered, there are so many people, like every single person has a motive to kill them, and it's just really fun. It's like Knives Out, you know? It's just like my favorite kind of murder mystery, fun vibe. I loved the spooky island vibes in this book. It had just been a long time since I had read a thriller that made me this excited. Another one of my favorite thrillers this year is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Anybody surprised? No, because Riley Sager is my favorite thriller author. I love this book so much too because I got my sister to read this book this summer, so it was really fun to be able to kind of like buddy read this book with her. I have an entire vlog of that, so I'll leave it down below if you missed it. But this book was just so great. It was so Haunting of Hill House vibes, which I just love because Haunting of Hill House is one of my favorite shows ever. And I love that we're following this girl, Maggie, who, you know, her dad recently passed away, and he had written this book about this house that they grew up in called House of Horrors. He wrote this entire book about how their house was haunted, and she doesn't know if she believes any of it. And so now that her dad has died, she has to deal with the house that they left behind, so she has to go back there. And now she's questioning maybe it might be haunted because some weird shit is happening. And I love that it's like a thriller. There's like all these twists, there's all these different things happening in the plot that I didn't expect, and it was just so much fun. Like, I had so much fun reading this book. Another one of my favorite books that I read this year that I actually read twice this year is Long Bright River by Liz Moore. I read this for the first time in January physically, and then I loved it so much that I listened to the audio again in May. And I don't know what it is about this book, but this book just has the most immaculate vibes, and it's so like moody and atmospheric. And this book, we're following this female cop who lives in Philadelphia. The opioids crisis has kind of taken over that area, and her sister is a drug addict who has recently gone missing. And so we spend this book trying to figure out what happened to her sister, where her sister is. And this book is considered a thriller, but I honestly think it's more of like a slow burn literary fiction mystery novel, because it's written in a way that's just so beautiful, and you kind of get like flashbacks of their childhood. And I feel like this book is really more about their sisterhood and like their relationship. Yeah, I don't know what it is about it, but I just get the urge to reread this sometimes. Like, I kind of want to reread it now just talking about it. So yeah, definitely one of my favorites this year. This book is just so great. It's something else. And it was on Obama's favorite books of the year list, so you know, it's gotta be great. And then the last book I want to talk about before I jump into my top 5 of the year is The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain. This one was like so close to making it into my top 5 books of the year because this book is incredible. It's a historical fiction time travel kind of novel. This girl named Carly is living in the 1970s, and she finds out that she's pregnant with her husband's baby who has recently died. And they find out the baby is going to be born with a heart problem that they're not going to be able to fix, and the baby's going to die as soon as it's born. But then somebody in her life, she finds out, is from the future, and he's gonna help her travel to the year 2001 to save her baby. The things that happen in this book is just absolutely gut-wrenching to imagine. Like, I can't imagine a mother or a sister or a wife having to make these kinds of decisions about the people in your life. It was just such a moving story. It was so freaking beautiful, and there were so many plot twists. I was completely shook over some of the things that happened in this book. All right, now we are down to the top 5. This is very exciting. So the first one is going to be Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. Oh my gosh, it completely took me by surprise. I read this book because of you guys, because I read it for the video that I did of reading your horror recommendations. So thank you for recommending me this book, because oh my god, it's freaking so good. And this book is about these 4 horror authors who are like really well known, and they're gonna be going and staying the night in this haunted house that's like really well known in the country, and they're gonna be staying the night on Halloween night in this haunted house, and it's gonna be live streamed. This book was just so much fun. The vibes were just so great. I really loved all the characters in this book, but I especially love the female horror author in this book. I just thought she was so badass and so cool and like freaking goals. And I also did love our main character Sam, who is not only a horror author, but he's also a professor, and he teaches like a horror writing class. And I love that this book kind of talks about what makes something great horror, and just like the discussion about the genre of horror in this book was also really cool and really fascinating. And I just loved it so much. I loved all of the history about this haunted house, and the ending had me freaking shook. Like, the ending was so good, and it just like ended on this crazy plot twist that I was like, what the fuck? Blew away my expectations that I had for it. Like, it was so great. The next book in my top 5 is The Nesting by C.J. Cook, and I think this one especially blew me away because I had no expectations going into it whatsoever. This one is described as a gothic thriller, and I think it kind of has like a horror vibe to it as well. But it's basically following this girl who gets on this train, and she has recently gone through a really bad breakup, and she's homeless and she has nowhere to go, and she's feeling very suicidal when she overhears the girl in front of her on the train that's applying for this nannying job that's going to make a whole lot of money, and she doesn't know if she wants to do it. So our main character applies for that nannying position using that other girl's identity, and she gets the job. Then we're following this girl who's going to be living with this false identity and going to be a nanny to these 2 girls in Norway in this house that may or may not be haunted. Oh my gosh, this book just had the most perfect ideal atmosphere for me in a book. Like, it was absolutely amazing. It was like spooky and dark and mysterious and weird, and there were these stories about these elk, like these moose, that I will never forget. Like, it was absolutely haunting. It gave me chills. It kind of reminded me of the show The Haunting of Bly Manor. Like, it definitely had those vibes, and it also reminds me of The Turn of the Key, even though I don't think this is an adaptation, because I know both of those things are adaptations of The Turn of the Screw. So I don't know if this is an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw or not, but it definitely has those vibes. And I just thought this book was incredible. Like, I don't know, like, I see this book not getting that many great reviews, and I'm just baffled and I don't understand, because I just thought it was so good. Like, this book is everything, and I can't wait to reread it. Another book in my top 5 that I'm sure nobody is going to be surprised by is The Troop by Nick Cutter. I might have pushed a lot of people to read this book this year, and then a lot of people really didn't like this book, and I'm sorry about that, but oh my god, I loved this book. And this book is a really, really dark and gory and graphic body horror kind of novel, and it just doesn't sound like something I would have enjoyed. I actually read this book as part of like an experiment that I did when I just did a reading 3 hyped horror novels, and at that point I wasn't really a huge fan of horror when I did that video. And since reading this book, I've become obsessed with horror books. Like, I don't know what it was about this, I just loved it. I loved it so much. This book follows this troop of Boy Scouts, and they all go to this island in the Canadian wilderness, and then while they're there, this man stumbles upon their island, and he's walking up to them, shoveling dirt into his mouth, and he's saying he's so hungry, and they don't know what's wrong with him. The body horror that happens in this book is so unbelievably disturbing. Like, this book made me sick to my stomach, but like in a good way. I don't even know how to describe what it was about this book, but I just loved it so much. It's very like Lord of the Flies vibes, but like a lot more gory and dark. This was also kind of absolutely terrifying to read during a pandemic, just because of the way the things that happen in this book kind of parallel what's going on in our real world. But it was also just fascinating. Like, I don't know, it was so well written, and it was so good up until the very end. I just thought it ended in such a great way, and I just really credit this book to getting me into horror this year. Like, after this book, I read over 20 horror books this year. Like, who am I? This book also inspired my book club name for next year, because it's going to be called The Book Troop. All right, and I'm down to my final 2, and I think I have decided that both of these books are like my top 2 books of the year, but I can't pick which one of these is my like actual #1 favorite, so they're just my top 2. So the first one that I want to talk about is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I know a lot of people are going to say this book is overhyped now because nobody will shut the fuck up about this book, but oh my god, this book was just everything I've ever wanted in a book. It was just and definitely one of the best written books that I've ever read. Like, I don't know how to describe the feeling that I got from reading this book, but it was like I felt nostalgic for something that I had never even experienced before, and it was just such a comforting read, but it also was just so sad and lonely. And this is one of those books that just make you think about life. And basically what happens in this book is it's kind of like a fantasy historical fiction kind of novel with some magical realism, because we're following this woman named Addie LaRue who gets forgotten by everyone that she meets, but she gets to live forever. So she lives for hundreds of years, but she's forgotten by everyone that she meets. So like literally she'll meet someone and then 10 seconds later they forget who she is. Incredibly lonely and sad, you know? Like, yeah, she gets to live forever, but she's forgotten by everyone that she meets. So it's like a very, very lonely life. And then this story really takes off when she meets this guy in a bookshop and he remembers who she is. Yeah, I don't know what it is about this book. I mean, a lot of it takes place in New York and it's very, very atmospheric and just so beautiful. And New York is one of my favorite places in the whole world, so that definitely contributed to why I loved it so much. But like I said, I think it's just the feeling that I got from this book, the way that it was written. It was so incredibly moving, and I just thought there were so many really good plot twists in this book. Like, there were definitely moments for sure where I felt like the writing got a little bit slow, or like the story definitely slowed down a little bit, but I also kind of appreciate the fact that it's a slow burn and you really feel the length of those years that Addie is living. And all of these characters in this book are just so fascinating to read about, and Addie LaRue as a character is definitely one of my favorite characters that I've ever read. Like, she's gonna stay in my heart forever, and this book was amazing. It really moved me to tears at the end. Like, I was bawling my eyes out at the end of this book. I think half of the reason why I was crying is because it was over, to be honest. But it was also just so fucking beautiful the way this book ended. Oh my god, it gave me chills all over my body. And if I had to like pick a song that matches the mood of this book, I feel like it would be Cardigan by Taylor Swift. Because I feel like when she says that line, when I felt like I was an old cardigan under someone's bed, you put me on and said I was your favorite. Like, that line, oh my god, it just fits with Addie LaRue's character. Like, those feelings, oh my god. Anyways, I could go on about this book all day, but I will shut up. It's amazing. And then lastly, one of my top 2 books of the year is Loveless by Alice Oseman. I don't know if any of you were surprised to see this book on this list after I completely bawled my eyes out over this book. But this book is one of my top favorites of the year because it's very, very personal to me. And so I don't think this would be a book that I'm just gonna like go around recommending to everyone. And I don't think it's gonna be on everyone's favorite books of the year list. But this book was just such a personal experience for me, and I've never felt more seen by a main character in my entire life. This book follows this young girl named Georgia who is struggling to figure out her identity, and she's learning about asexuality and realizing that she might identify as asexual and aromantic. Not to get too personal or anything, but that's something I've always questioned about myself, and I've just never really read a lot of books with a main character who's struggling with asexuality, and I've just never underlined more, highlighted more, related more to a main character than I did with Georgia. Like, it was just so relatable, and it kind of just like broke my heart, like how much I related to it. Like, it was just a crazy, really personal reading experience reading this book. I talked about it more in this reading vlog that I did earlier this year, so if you want to know more of my thoughts specifically about that, then I will link that vlog down below. Not only did I love like Georgia and her identity story in this book, but I also just really loved all the characters in this book. And this definitely had kind of like fangirl vibes because of like the college setting and the way that she has this roommate that is just like, they don't really get along that great at first, but then they slowly develop one of the cutest friendships you've ever read. And this book has one of the cutest side romances that I've ever read in my whole life. Like, I would read an entire book about the side romance that's happening in this book. Like, it is so freaking cute. Chef's kiss, one of my faves. I just love that all of these characters are so relatable and so cool, and I just want to reread this again so bad, but I also don't want my heart to like fucking shatter because this book broke me. All right, well, those are all of my favorite books of 2020. I can't believe how great of a reading year that I had, because I've never really had this issue with picking a #1 favorite book before. Like, in past years, it's always been pretty obvious to me which book is my #1 favorite, but this year, like, those top 5 were really like, they all could have been my #1 if they were read in different years. Like, I love them all so much for different reasons. Please let me know, are any of these books also on your best books of the year list? What are some of the best books that you read in 2020? Please give me any recommendations down below. Let me know what you were feeling the most in 2020. And thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye.